So one thing that NURBS is excellent for is modeling things that are very uniform in their curvature. And so in this instance, we've got a beaker with the exception of this little spout, it's kind of radially symmetrical. And what I mean by that is if you've got this rim that wraps all the way around, you've got a little bit of curvature here that wraps all the way around, and at the bottom of the glass, again, you've got some curvature. It's not just a cylinder, but it represents this thing that is sort of has a radial symmetry. And one way that we can use curves and NURBS to create this quite quickly is to generate a curve that represents exactly the profile of an object and then revolve that around a certain axis. So if we go into the front view, then we should be faced with this grid and the front view. And if we create a CV curve, it's all going to be built in the same plane. It's important that when you're creating curves that are going to be revolved or anything like that, they should only exist in one plane, essentially, a two-dimensional space. So a note about this reference image: it's really hard to get perfectly orthographic reference. So you'll see that if we look at the top, you can see just a little bit of the far side of the beaker. And if we look at the bottom of the beaker, we can actually see a lot of what's going to be what is the bottom face of this beaker. And that's because this picture was taken sort of to line up the top, but because it was taken a little bit at an angle, then we've got more of the bottom. So basically, I've just kind of lined up where I think the bottom of the beaker sort of should be in terms of cutting through the middle there. So it's never going to be 100% accurate. You're never going to find reference that's going to be exactly, super easy to work with, but you just have to make an estimate based on the images that you have available. So what that means is I'm going to treat this grid with the zero, the center line, as the bottom of the beaker. So let's go create Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. And let's just open up the options and make sure that we've got our degree set to cubic. So we've got our degree set to cubic, and we've got our grid here, and we've got a reference image, and we're set to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down X and click, and the X is going to snap to the grid. So I'm going to make sure that first CV is perfectly at the origin. So it's lined up exactly there. And now, similar to some other programs, if I hold down Shift, it's going to make sure that the next CV curve, or the next CV that I create, is going to be in an axis that's lined up. So I'm going to Shift click somewhere over here, and it doesn't have to be. There's a little bit of flexibility here. I'm going to click again over here. And it takes quite a bit of experience to sort of figure out exactly what placement of CVs is going to create the curvature that you want. But I'm going to keep shift clicking vertically now. And you'll see it's a little hard to see on the screen again, but you've got some curvature that's going to be created as a result of the points that you're putting down. If you put down in the corner the CVs right close together, then you would have a very, very tight curve. If you put them more spaced apart, then you have a more gentle curve. And if you just clicked once over here at the origin and once up here, then you would have a very, very broad curve. So fortunately, we can always modify this after, but we've got kind of a rough starting point for the corner of the beaker. Okay, so now we just go up, and however many points you want to put up doesn't matter too much. Let's just give it a little bit of resolution. So I'm shift clicking somewhere up here, shift clicking again, and now we should be getting the next one. We're going to get close to the top where the lip bulges out. So I'm going to shift click again, and then now I'm just freehand clicking out somewhere there so that I've got this kind of curve out. And I'm going to take it a little wide because we can always change this after the fact, but I'm just going to take it wide, and I'm going to keep clicking. Actually, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to just click once directly above the previous one and stop it there. And I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to complete the object. So now you should see a green line. That's the final curve. And in your outliner, you should see a curve that's been created, and we can rename that beaker underscore profile, because this is the curve that is going to function as the profile of the beaker. Now we can go into control vertex mode and do a little bit of damage control, perhaps, if we wanted to sort of tweak these so they fit a little more closely with our reference. And we kind of want to make sure that this is straight up and down. I noticed that there's a little bit of a bowing or curve between here. So what I might do is go into object mode, go into curve point mode, and then click somewhere along here just to add more, add more resolution. And then shift right click up to insert knot. And then we've got another CV that's been added, and we can use that to just make sure this is a little straighter, perhaps. And down here at the bottom of the beaker, I think that this curve is a little bit too tight. So I'm just going to move this one up and this one over to kind of make that a little more gentle. So at this point, it's just about manipulating the curve that we've blocked out to create a profile that fits well. So now that we've got one curve, we also want to make sure that this beaker has some thickness to it. So we want to actually make sure that the curve kind of goes around and down and inside, so that it's, we've got both parts of the, the inside face of the glass and the outside face of the glass. So what I'm actually going to do is just duplicate this curve. Select the curve and Command D. So now we've got beaker profile and beaker profile 1, and they're sitting exactly on top of each other. So I'm going to just move one of them up. And again, I'm not sure exactly how thick this glass is, so I'm just going to do my best to estimate it. So I'm just going to move this up a little bit. And again, it's important that we're sitting right on the y-axis. So you don't want to move this left or right at all. You just want to move it up in one direction. And if you accidentally moved it, you could hold down X and with the X-axis just snap it to the midline. Okay, we're also going to go into the let's try take 3. We're going to go into the scale tool and just scale this down by clicking on the yellow square, so that we're scaling it in all axes. And because the pivot point is at the center line here, it's at the start of the curve, it's all going to be scaled relative to that. So we can scale it down so that there's some offset here. We notice that there's some problems here at the top, but we can fix that later. So now we should kind of have this curve that's moving sort of parallel to the other one. And then we can go into the control vertex mode and select some of these and move them up. And we could kind of tweak them a little bit so that they're a little more, so it looks like they're kind of, we've got kind of a consistent thickness to the glass here. Okay, so we've got two curves that are parallel to each other. And we actually want to make sure that they're one curve. So I'm actually going to join the curves together. There is a command called attach under the curves tool. And this is going to attach curves together. If we just selected, I'm just going to reset the settings and just do a regular, I'm just going to select both these curves. And if I just do a regular attach, they actually get attached here at the bottom which is not what I want. It leaves the two curves that I had originally and it connects them at the bottom. And that's not what I want. So what the attach tool does by default is that it connects the two edges of the curve that are closest together. But what I want to do is I want to force it to attach these two ends together. And the way that I can do that is by defining a curve point. So I'm going to right click and go up to curve point on this curve. And you'll notice something interesting about Maya. When I'm entering a component mode, that's with this right mouse marking menu, it only does it for the object that I'm sort of doing it over top of. In order to get them both into curve mode, I kind of have to do it twice. Once by right clicking on one of them and once by right clicking on the other. And it can be a little bit tricky to actually make sure that both of them are in curve point mode. Or if you had two polygonal meshes, both of them in vertex mode, or both of them in edge mode or face mode or something like that. There is another way of entering component modes that works globally on the whole scene instead of object by object, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So for now, we've got, I'll just do this one more time so that you make sure that you follow along. So one curve selected up to curve point, and then we can shift select the other and up to curve point, and they should be both turquoise. I realize again that's quite hard to see on the screen. They're both this turquoise color, or cyan maybe. And on one of them we can click, and if we click and drag, then we make sure that the point is right up at the top at the end of the curve. And it's red while you're dragging it, and it turns yellow when you release it. And then shift click on the other one, and so then we've got two curve points, and they're both right at the end of the curve. So now that we've done that, we can run the attach command again. And I'm going to go into the options box, just reset this, and I'm going to turn off keep originals because I don't want the old ones hanging around. I just want the new unified curve. If we turned on insert not, I think that would insert another CV sort of in the middle of them, and so I might do that. I'll turn on insert not. And now if I hit attach, the two curves get joined together where we had defined those curve points. And if we go into control vertex mode, we've got this CV in the middle that is connecting the two. Okay, so in the outliner, we've got the beaker profile 1, which was our duplicated curve, and we've got our old one, which is kind of empty now. And so we've got some history that's built up on this, and at this point I can do a delete by type history. So that's under edit, delete by type history, and that old curve sort of history gets deleted, and I can just rename this back to beaker profile, and our scene is cleaner because of that. We can go into control vertex mode again and start tweaking this so that we kind of want a little bit of a rounder side to this, or lip to this, and kind of, again, when it comes to reference, what's best is if you actually have a physical object in front of you, but in lieu of that, we'll just sort of create a lip that seems plausible for this kind of glassware. And now that we're sort of happy with a complete profile, again, this side is open here, but the profile starts at the bottom, comes up, around the top, back down, and back into the middle here. I'm just going to tap to go back into perspective mode. Now what we want to do is we want to take this curve and revolve it all the way around 360 degrees. And we can do that with the surfaces menu, surfaces revolve. So that's pretty near the top here. So surfaces revolve, and again, we'll look at the options. And pretty much we just want to reset the settings, and the default settings are pretty much good. One thing to note here is that there's some options for the output geometry. There's NURBS, polygons, or Bezier. So what you could do is you could create this curve and then output polygons, and it's going to create some polygonal geometry that you can edit in like we know how to do from our previous experience with modifying polygon geometry. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as NURBS. We could always convert it later, and I'll hit revolve. All right. Now we've got a pretty convincing beaker right away. And this would probably, obviously this took us a little bit of time to do, but once you're familiar with creating curves, this could be done much, much faster than it would take you to create, I don't know, like a cylinder and then extrude the middle and then tweak the outside and do all of that sort of stuff. This is much faster for creating these sorts of smooth shapes. You'll notice that it's black. We've got the surfaces in the wrong direction. So we want to make sure that, kind of like reversing our normals again, we want to make sure that the surfaces are in the right direction. So under surfaces, and it's way down at the bottom, the very last option, reverse direction. And once we've reversed the direction of our surfaces, we get a nice gray color indicating that we can see the correct side of the surfaces, and the inside is gray too. And we have our pretty much complete object. The last thing that we need to do is just make this little spout. So if we go into control vertex mode, we could select some of these CVs, and I want to make sure that I'm not accidentally selecting any of the ones that are sort of behind it, so I can control drag around the back side to make sure that we don't have any other ones. And we can move them out and move them down. But I realize that this is going to create a pretty broad spout. We want it tighter, right? So in order to make things tighter, generally the best idea is to add a little bit of resolution here. So I'm going to actually go into the display layers and turn off our beaker reference. So I've created for you a couple of display layers. And if we click on the V here, that should hide our beaker reference. So that's just a quick way to toggle that on and off. So I want to add some more resolution here. So instead of, similar to like adding an edge loop, we're going to add an isoparm. So let's go into isoparm mode. And if we click and drag on this isoparm, we can bring out a preview of what that's going to be. And we can shift, click, and drag on the other side and bring another one out. So we've got an isoparm, two dotted lines that represent what's going to be isoparms on either side of this bit here. Now, because I'm such a perfectionist in some ways, I'm not happy with eyeballing these, so I'm going to do something kind of crazy here. I'm going to open the script editor. Script editor. I'm going to select both the last two lines. You guys don't have to do this, and I'm not going to teach you Mel in this course, but I'm just going to show you how it can be useful. Whoops. And I'm going to change the values to 3.8 and 4.2, and then I'm going to select them and hit enter on the keyboard, on the numpad, and now I've got perfectly symmetrical isoparms. There's probably another way to do that in the interface, but I like kind of doing it this way, and I'm not suggesting you have to do the same thing, but Mel commands are sort of it's running in the background for everything you do in Maya. Okay, so we've got our two isoparms previewed here, and so we can go under surfaces, insert isoparms, and now we should get two new loops here. And if we go into control vertex mode, we've got these extra loops here. Grab some of these points here and just kind of scale them and move them and create something that's not totally beaker-like, but will kind of suffice for this in-class demo. I should also add here at this point, so this curve here, the profile that we do, is still connected. We haven't deleted the history on this revolved surface, so this curve is still live. If we wanted to, we could go into the CV mode here, select these CVs, and if we change the curve, that's also updating our revolved surface. So that's important to note. So if we decided, oh, you know what, this bottom, the sort of radius of it isn't quite right, it should be sort of have a better fall off, you can go and press 4 to go into wireframe, and it's a little bit easier to see the CVs that way. So the curve is still live, and it still is influencing our surface. With our move tool, W to get the move tool, in our move settings we have symmetry, which is helpful in many scenarios. And if we turn symmetry on, either in object Z or world Z, basically that's going to be symmetrical across this plane. And so now when we select CVs, you can see that the other half, the ones on the other side, get selected. And that's helpful for making kind of a symmetrical modifications. So again, that's in the Move Tool settings. If you don't see the Move Tool settings, you can double click on the Move Tool button that's over here, or make sure you click on the hammer icon that's up here. And down here under Symmetry Settings, we can either turn symmetry off or we can turn it on with the axis of our preference. So that's, I'm just going to move these in to tighten this up a little bit, and I think these are a little too low. Let's kind of move that up. So this is where the pick walking can also be useful. If we wanted to select one CV and sort of modify them one by one, we can select one of them, and then if we hit up, that's gonna change our selection across the surface in one direction. And in this case, it's a little bit counterintuitive because up and down is moving left and right, but left and right is actually moving sort of in the other axis. So we could hit right to sort of move along, and that way we can kind of sort of systematically kind of move through these and adjust the surface to our preference. Because some of these are going to be hiding inside, it's going to be a little hard to see what they're doing. So just using the arrow keys is a little bit of a helper. And again, we can use hull mode to sort of go into that selecting loops. So for example, if we wanted to select a whole loop and sort of move it up or down, we can do that there, or scale them in. And in this case, with this beaker, because we've revolved it with the CV curve, it might be simpler just to go into to edit the actual curve itself to make those sort of edits that are moving all the way around. All right, so there we go. There's our beaker. So a relatively simple shape, but NURBS are a good candidate for making things like that.